Contrary to the demands of a terrestrial existence which compels man to remain in a constant state of movement and agitation, thus concealing his divine nature from him, the aim of meditation and yoga, and especially of Hatha Yoga, is gradually to arrive at an inner condition permitting a very particular inward slowing up to take place in oneself until a state of profound immutability is reached, in which the reality of one's supreme being is finally recognized. Among the various methods of meditation practiced in ancient India to this end was a very important one called Nada Yoga, Yoga of the Sound. The science of this form of meditation seems either totally lost or inaccessible today. It appears at any rate impossible to find anyone who has himself practiced it and has sufficient knowledge of its highly subtle and intricate details to be able to teach it. Its technique will be explained to whatever extent possible in the 5 chapters that follow, and because of its profound mystical significance, it will be referred to from time to time throughout the rest of the book, particularly in the chapters on Hatha Yoga. The value of this form of meditation cannot be overstated, especially for those who do not yet know where their attention should be directed, and experience great difficulty retaining their concentration during meditation. Having taken his meditation posture and prepared himself mentally and physically by quietening his mind, relaxing and feeling a deep global sensation of his body, the adept should now decide firmly not to move anymore. Closing his eyes, he should remain as still as possible, listening internally with sustained attention. If he can be inwardly quiet enough and deeply absorbed in its search, he will, if he is truly persistent, suddenly become aware of an unusual, feeble sound which can be heard deep inside the ears and head, concealed from him before and obscured by the din of his incessant mental restlessness. When the adept has become aware of the mysterious presence in him of this sound, he may at first be struck with surprise and awe, but no matter how weak or distant it may appear, it will be very obvious that this is no ordinary sound but a mystical one of a higher cosmic order. It could be called the primordial sound. If at this stage the aspirant can succeed in remaining sufficiently alert and aware while maintaining his effort of intense concentration, he cannot possibly fail to observe that this sound has an extraordinarily uninterrupted continuity about it, a crystal-like vibration which resembles the noise of the ocean with many other different ultra-sounds superimposed on it. When the adept is fully engrossed in his meditation and is sufficiently freed from the grip of his lower self, he will perceive that the more he rises to and becomes merged in the higher levels of his consciousness, the louder and more shrill the sound will get. He will also begin to note with wonder that this sound has a curious unearthly sparkle about it, somewhat reminiscent of the flickering light of a star, so that it seems almost imperceptibly to oscillate continuously inside his head. He will discover that this unusual sound with its strange vibrations, celestial twinklings, and above all, enigmatic continuity, will become a most precious support for his concentration in all his future meditations. From that day onwards, the frequency with which he will lose himself in his habitual self-forgetfulness and mental reveries will decrease considerably. He will be protected from blindly wandering into the territory of his enemy, his ordinary state of being and feeling as he so often did in the beginning of his spiritual struggles. The adept should not be surprised if on certain days this sound shifts to another part of the head, sometimes vibrating slightly to the right, at other times to the left, and even, on occasions, in the middle or back of the skull. All these changes take place to prevent his meditation from becoming stale and mechanical, as well as to purify certain aspects of his mind. The special benefit that the aspirant will derive from this mystical sound is priceless. First, it will sustain him in his meditation by giving his attention something definite to hold on to, and so allow him to concentrate better with little or no wavering. Second, it will help him little by little to rise to the higher and more luminous planes of his consciousness. Third, it will have a particularly purifying and calming effect on his mind as well as on his feelings. Finally, it will become the means for an ardent and sincere adept to become immediately aware when his attention begins to weaken and waver during his meditation, and this higher state of consciousness in him gets diluted and mixed up again with his ordinary mind, for he will not fail to observe that at such moments the sound has either altogether disappeared or it has lost its supernal luster and subtle ultra-vibrations, becoming very distant and pale. When meditating with this nada, it is essential that the aspirant always seek and follow the particular aspect of it which is most subtle and ultra in pitch as well as in brilliance. Even when the sound becomes very shrill and loud in moments of deep concentration, he must not be tempted to be satisfied with it merely because it is sharp and resonant. He should relentlessly attempt to rise further and further into ever more subtle spheres of its mysterious invisible kingdom. Circumspection and discretion are indispensable in this delicate and difficult work if the adept does not want to risk stopping at that stage, losing his way and start sliding backwards. Later on, the aspirant must be able to turn to this inner sound at will, endeavor to hear it clearly and try to hold on to it during his various daily activities, whether walking in the street, writing, reading, talking, or eating. When he is finally able to hear it distinctly in outer life conditions as well as during meditation, he will be astonished to perceive that no matter how tumultuously external noises may thunder all around, they cannot obliterate this sacred sound in him, nor interfere with, nor alter in any manner the resplendent beauty of its tone and sparkling effulgence. When the adept uses this mystical sound as the principal basis and support for his meditation, he will notice that each time he finishes meditating there is an unusual sensation throughout the whole of his body which will feel strangely rarefied and weightless. He should appreciate the importance of this subtle physical sensation and learn to hold on to it in his active life as well. It will become an additional support to help him remember himself and remain more profoundly connected to his higher being as well as be more relaxed physically and conserve the vital force needed to nurture and keep the wheel of his spiritual work moving. The aspirant should look upon this nada as a divine grace and rare opportunity, always turning to it with the utmost respect, revering it as the treasured means that can make his deliverance possible. However, it must be stressed that this sound is not to be taken as an end in itself, but only as a temporary prop in his spiritual struggles. If the adept arrives at a state of higher consciousness during his meditation, then it is to this ineffable light that his attention must turn and in which it must be absorbed. The sound, in the end, only acts as a benign guide and support towards the greater aim. Nada Yoga, Yoga of the Inner Sound, Part 2. The first time the adept hears this mystical sound when meditating, it may be very faint indeed according to his level of being and ardor. And even if he has heard and recognized it, it may keep disappearing and reappearing every so often. It will, so to speak, play with the aspirant, constantly putting him on trial to test his perseverance. Or it may vanish altogether and the adept will not hear it anymore for some time. He must not be disheartened at this but persistently look for it again and again until he finally succeeds in hearing it once more. The importance of this nada, this sacred sound, cannot be stressed enough. It could be compared to a divine signpost compassionately indicating the way to a struggling seeker in this difficult quest. A man's thoughts and feelings are constantly changing. There is no continuity of being in him. He cannot conceive what it means to have inner continuity of being. He is like a dried leaf blown by the winds of his inner moods, thoughts, and desires. When the adept recognizes this nada, he perceives its unearthly continuity. This sound is like the whisper of the wind and the hissing of ocean waves. On higher spheres, it has a silvery aspect, like jingling glass pieces. The adept should focus on the most shrill part of the sound. Later, when the aspirant gets more familiar with it, he will begin to hear two or more sounds at the same moment. At first he may not quite realize or be really sure that he is hearing two sounds simultaneously. However, if at such times he listens carefully, he will note that one of these two sounds is slightly more obvious, whereas the other is a little more high-pitched and more subtle. He should listen carefully to both sounds for a while until it becomes absolutely clear to him which of these two sounds is the more subtle and highly pitched. It is to this one he must then gently let his attention turn and concentrate on. He must not be tempted to follow the more obvious of these two sounds anymore, even though it will keep intruding and drawing him back to it. In meditation, attention is drawn to the evident sounds. Similarly, in life, people are tempted by obvious aspects, missing the subtle ones. This applies to their friends, hobbies, and entertainment. The subtler aspects of art often escape most people. Without inner discernment, this tendency persists even after life. When using this mystical sound as the basic support for his meditation, the adept should also be very alert and attentive as to where the subtler aspects of this sound are drawing him within himself. He will thus, little by little, gravitate to ever finer states of consciousness and will start to sense an out-of-the-ordinary inner continuity of being, which is beyond description and which it is impossible for him to experience in his habitual state. As his meditation deepens, it will bring with it a most subtle, transparent, and luminous consciousness. He will no longer sense himself in the same way as he did in the past. He will become an unchanging spectator, plunged in the vast silence of an eternal cosmic knownness. This mystical sound can carry the aspirant during his spiritual efforts. Especially at the beginning of his struggles, this sacred sound will be a benign blessing for him. It will also be a boon in all his other spiritual practices. Through its grace, he will gradually understand where he has to be placed in himself. He will discover what it means to be. Nada Yoga, Yoga of the Inner Sound, Part 3. Just as a subject cannot see his king without preparation or a guide, so it is with a man's spiritual quest to reach the Supreme Lord. A man needs an intermediary, the sacred sound, nada, to connect with the divine. This mystical sound is essential for spiritual search, guiding the aspirant through his inner labyrinth. Nada is a sacred intermediary, a guide, and support in spiritual exercises. It offers hope and the possibility of redemption. In the beginning, it helps navigate the complexities of one's being. Finding it reveals the simplicity of the path. This princely aspect of nature has always been silently waiting. Turning inward, one finds it ever-present and unchanging. Remaining connected to the divine requires renunciation of one's lower nature. This renunciation leads to liberation and higher consciousness. In the beginning, great effort and sincerity are needed. The inner mystical sound is a sacred rope, guiding one from darkness to light. Before a man can pass through the gates of a palace, he must prepare himself in all kinds of ways. He has to learn etiquette, clean himself, and dress fittingly. Likewise, an aspirant must purify himself from undesirable tendencies and negative emotions. It is impossible to climb higher realms if burdened with worldly desires and unsound judgments. Before a man can look through a window, he must clean it first. Cleaning and ordering his inner home are imperative to access sacred territories within. Otherwise, he will be flung down to his current state each time he attempts to rise. He will suffer until sufficient transformation allows him to maintain himself in luminous regions. When the adept concentrates on this inner mystical sound during his meditation, it acts as a sacred intermediary between him and the sublime in himself, indicating the way and at the same time helping to free him from identification with his lower nature, drawing him further and further away from it to the higher realms of his being, through which the purification of his ordinary self will start taking place. The concentration on this sacred sound will occupy the aspirant's attention in such a manner as to make it easier for him to keep away from unwanted thoughts and remain inwardly more collected and quiescent during his meditation. This will allow another state of consciousness to manifest, vastly different from routine existence. Initially, it may seem like a strange emptiness. Some may be disturbed or frightened by it. A sincere aspirant will experience unusual peace and well-being. If at times, especially in the beginning, the adept experiences some difficulty in hearing this mystical sound, then immediately on waking up first thing in the morning he should turn his attention inwards to look for it and listen intently. He will find it astonishingly shrill and loud at that particular hour. It will be clearly heard, oscillating gently and sparkling with such sublime beauty that, as said earlier, it may only be compared to the jewel-like twinkling light of a heavenly star. It should always accompany the aspirant in his struggles, sustaining him in all his meditations and other spiritual exercises. This mystical sound is like a sacred hook of grace cast down to the adept to help draw him away from his ordinary state of being. The getting away from his habitual way of thinking and feeling and the emptying of himself constitute the preliminary essential step to allow something of a higher order to fill the void he will have created in himself. Only in this way can the holy descent of grace take place in him and pervade his being with its divine flame, the indispensable instrument for the purification and transformation of his lower nature, which will eventually render him worthy and strong enough to be able to stand in the presence of his supreme monarch and bear his royal look and light without cringing. When the adept has undergone sufficient purification and transformation, and insofar as he has learnt to die to himself, he will then inevitably rise and become merged with this effulgent light in the same way that evaporating water rises into the air and merges with it under heat from the sun.